Hello everyone! Welcome to yet another day where we have to trudge through the clown decade. And just as something goes mainstream that most of the right wing of the internet has been saying for years, of course you get the hypocritical pushback from the left, so that's going to be something we cover today. So getting right into it, poorer white pupils let down and neglected, say MPs. And this is from the BBC. So while they might be spinning it, to have that as the headline is rather good news. It's 3 years or more late, but it's still good news. So, white working class pupils have been failed by decades of neglect in England's education system, a report by MPs says. The Education Select Committee accused the government of a lack of targeted support for disadvantaged white pupils. And the thing is, this is under the Conservative government, so to call them, well, you know, how the leftists are called racists, in this case would be ridiculous. However, when it comes to what many people have been saying for decades, that white working class boys do seem to be falling behind in schools and education, nothing appears to be done about it. Whereas if this was to do with black people, Asian people, any other category, the government would be all over it trying to fix the problem. When it comes to white boys, though, as the Select Committee has said, they just get neglected. It says the use of the term white privilege suggests white pupils are at an advantage, is the opposite of the reality for poor white pupils. The government says it is committed to making sure that no child is left behind. The report warns that white pupils on free school meals, aka poor people, underachieve from early years in school through to GCSE, A-level and university entry, compared with pupils on free school meals from other ethnic groups. Now, if I was some sort of racial collectivist, I would probably be saying, oh my god, this is clear racism from the government, look at these outcomes. Like the left do if any report of BAME people falling behind in some category would do. But I'm not going to do that because I'm not an idiot. Now, could it be institutional racism that's letting them get neglected and left behind? Yes. If there is special treatment going to BAME people, then the white ethnic majority should be getting that help too. But I haven't read enough to make that conclusion yet, or put forward that argument. And this is what separates me from the likes of racial collectivists like, say, oh, I don't know, Vorsh or someone like that, who would see something like this and instantly go, well, this is clearly structural racism, this needs to change from the inside, we need a revolution and to burn down Parliament, etc., etc. But no, there could easily be alternative reasons for this, such as a worse work ethic for white poorer people, maybe, compared with other groups. It could be that minority groups tend to all congregate in big cities or in suburbs of big cities like London, Leicester, Manchester, places like this. Whereas more white working class people congregate all throughout the country, in rural areas too, where there might not be as much central funding as there would be in, say, London. Like most problems, it's multifactorial, and in this case I don't think it's any different, but I would like to read on and see what was in the report. Committee Chairman Robert Halfon said it was a major social injustice that so little had been done to address this gap in attainment, and accused the government of muddled thinking in suggesting it could be explained by poverty. If you think it's about poverty, then it doesn't explain why most other ethnic groups do much better, he said, which I would agree with. Poor white pupils are falling behind every step of the way, he warned, and with almost 1 million young people being affected, this could not be swept under the carpet. At GCSE in 2019, which is the exams you do at about the ages of 15 and 16, 18% of white British pupils on free meals achieved grade 5 in English and maths. I have no idea what that means because I used to grade it in A, B, C, D, but I assume a 5 is equivalent to a C, which is a pass. Compared with 23% of the average for pupils on free meals. For university entry, 16% of white British pupils on free meals get places, compared with 59% of black African pupils on free meals, 59% of Bangladeshi pupils on free meals, and 32% of black Caribbean pupils on free meals. And I think if you actually look into it even deeper and divide it along gender lines, you'll find that a lot less white working class men, well, boys, go to university than compared with girls, and I assume that that is the same with other ethnicities as well. I think more girls go to university than boys in general. There's no reason that separation wouldn't carry on into the working class. But I'm still not sure what is actually causing this distinction in attainment, because there is quite a difference between white working class attainment compared with other ethnic groups, and it's not small by any stretch of the imagination. It's 16% for university entries, with 59% when it's black African pupils and 59% when it's Bangladeshi, and for some reason that drops down to 32% when it's black Caribbean. So it's not like a blanket the same amount for everyone in the quote-unquote BAME community. But there's clearly quite a difference, because that's still double the amount, well, double the proportion, I should say, of black Caribbean pupils. So I am interested to see if they found anything noteworthy here. So, Mr. Haflon warned against using the term white privilege in education, saying it was divisive and likely to promote disharmony and pits one group against another. Well, that's something I've been saying for years. The committee described white privilege, which has been used in a wider social context, as the idea of societal privilege that benefits white people over other ethnic groups. And obviously in this case we can see that the results clearly are showing the opposite. The committee, well, that doesn't mean that there's such thing as black privilege necessarily, or minority privilege necessarily. We can say there is for different reasons, but just because of better attainment it doesn't mean that we can say there is black privilege. The committee said that in education, privilege is the very opposite to what disadvantaged white children experience, and questioned whether under equality legislation schools should use that terminology. Well, it depends if we have critical race theory really embedded within our government and its laws, and honestly I wouldn't be surprised if we do. But the Labour MP on the committee, Kim Johnson, rejected the reference to white privilege as a red herring which was trying to stoke the culture war and avoid scrutiny of the lack of investment in schools and local communities. Amazing. I mean, for all I know, she could be right there, that there is a distinct lack of investment in some schools. My question would then be, why is there a lack of investment in some schools compared to others? And if that then is because it is based on the ethnic makeup of those communities that use the school, then obviously white privilege isn't at all a red herring, and should absolutely be purged from any sort of government document or any government analysis, or any independent analysis as well. If I was in any position of power and I see white privilege used unironically in any analysis, that analysis instantly goes in the bin, because I can tell the people who authored this have a lens looking at reality that basically flips it on its head. It's wrong. It isn't objective. It's not trying to be an analysis. It is trying to be a propaganda piece. And the government should be looking at these things in the same way, which hopefully they are. And hopefully this is going to be one of the first dominoes to fall back into the direction of normalcy. But we're at the beginning of clown decade, so I think a few more need to fall first. And I will obviously have a go at the hypocrisy a bit later, because I've got more reactions to this white privilege stuff coming from Twitter as usual. But we'll finish off this article first. So, why are poor white pupils falling behind? The report highlighted a mix of challenges about the local areas where many poor white pupils lived, and also cultural factors that could limit how much support they got from their families. These underlying social problems include poor local jobs market and lack of opportunity. Fair. Lack of community assets and social organisations, poor local services and transport. Well, is that a local council issue? Is that a government issue? Is that just the fact that the community doesn't really care for itself? That's quite hard to distinguish from that sentence. Families with multi-generational poverty. Well, I can see that's to me, it might be bad to say, but that says to me that families with multi-generational poor work ethic, but what do I know? Disengaged parents with poor experience of education. Well, again, that can just be broken. I mean, my grandparents, I don't think any of them were educated until they were in their 40s, but my parents still all got an education, so that can break, as I say. In response, the committee proposed more targeted funding and making the education system feel more relevant for those communities. Using pupil premium funding to provide more support, family hubs to get parents involved with children's learning, that's not necessarily a bad idea. Attract teachers to areas that could struggle to retain staff, ensure that work-related vocational education is available, and find a better way to talk about racial disparities. Well, given that they're saying we need to knock out white privilege from all these analyses, I think that actually does sound like a good thing. Because you obviously can't just say, stop talking about race, because if you say that, that gets called racist, whereas you phrase it in a way of saying, look, let's find a better way to talk about this. You're not going to stir up leftists into a frenzy where they will call you racist for trying to disengage in conversations about race. But one thing this BBC article doesn't go into, which I think it would have been a good idea to, is the report must have something as to why there is actually a disparity between ethnic groups when it comes to this issue, because that seems particularly universalist to me. It's just, oh, target the spending in areas where they're failing more, but that to me says pupils in general, not just white pupils, though obviously that will affect white pupils more because they're failing more. But it's not indicating that there's any unfair allocation of funds. It's not saying to me, oh look, this is a minority area, push more money into that at the expense of these white areas. To me, the report isn't saying that, but I don't know if the BBC is retracting that or just omitting those facts, or if the report is genuinely this universal. Because I don't know why the head of the committee would bring up that just saying it's poverty doesn't make sense, and then not go into whether there's actually some disparity in the funding of different ethnic communities when it comes to Britain. So it's interesting how this report has gone, because as I say, it seems pretty universalist if we're to trust the BBC, yet everyone is latching onto this white privilege thing it mentioned. For instance, we've got the classic from David Lammy. He said, the term white privilege didn't cause the neglect of the white working class pupils, which is amazing because that's not what the report said. A decade of conservative austerity in education, housing and youth service did. Which is actually, the report actually kind of agrees with that, David. Just as it destroyed the life chances of working class black and minority ethnic kids. Well, hang on, stop trying to divide us. Hang on a minute. You're the one saying that we need to keep white privilege then. Your issue is that they use the word white privilege and wanted it gone. But this report didn't say that it was white privilege that caused the issue. It was saying that maybe when people have the idea of white privilege in their head, it does take funds from one place and put it into another, which is what I mean before when I said everything seems a bit universalist in that report and its findings. But I think the BBC have admitted that it probably said something to the effect of minority communities got more funding and investment at the expense of poor white communities. But from what the BBC said, the report agrees with David Lammy here. It didn't say white privilege was the reason for it, it said white privilege and the idea behind it might have played a part in it. But David Lammy, being the ultimate race grifter, obviously doesn't understand the difference. And of course, Lammy is no longer the worst person in the Labour Party. That would have to go to Zara Sultana. And her tweet said this: it wasn't the phrase white privilege that caused 750 plus youth centres to close since 2010. It was the Conservative Party. Which again, I don't think the report is saying that youth centres closing is a reason for a disparity in these communities. They were very much on the subject of trying to encourage parents to get involved in kids' learning, along with direct investment into providing pupils more support, which isn't what a youth centre is. I reckon that is more for after-school clubs and things like that. I mean, I think it's a ridiculous thing. Youth clubs weren't a massive thing before, like, the 80s and 90s. They weren't that big at all, and we didn't have completely failing school systems and education systems at that point. They were genuinely improving. Whereas today, we've had them for years, and they really don't seem to have made that much difference. It's a really weird concept that these Labour MPs have in their head, but here we are. And I think the most disgusting tweet I saw was from Matthew Hodson, who is the executive director of AIDSmap. He is shamelessly HIV positive, and he just has the worst profile I've seen in my life. But he's a leftist LGBT person, what do you expect? But he put up this tweet saying, white privilege doesn't mean you've never faced hardship or challenges. Well, that's nice of him to say. It just means that your hardship or challenges you faced were not related to your skin colour. Well, again, from what this report says, it does actually play a factor in it, so that's just wrong. And then he reposts this BBC Bitesize video yet again to explain what white privilege is. Now, I've reacted to it before, but I want to react to it again because I'm so disgusted in this context it is used.
We've been engaged in a global conversation about race and racism. You've probably had discussions at home, at school, or at work, and in those conversations you've probably heard the term white privilege. I'd
like to remind you at this point that BBC Bitesize is the government-backed BBC's branch for educating children. As I've said many times before on this channel, I used it myself for GCSE and a little bit for A-level, and it used to be very good. It used to just teach you the subject and go off it, but from the things I've seen from it recently, they are really pushing hard on progressive ideology, and it needs to stop.
You may have even had this term used in a way that felt like an insult or an accusation.
That is more or less what the report said, yes. We have official documentation saying that this is how the word is used. and it has affected white working class boys' education. That's bad. And yet here's the BBC telling these young, poor white people that no, these are not problems due to their skin colour, despite reality saying otherwise.
Others will have told you that it's all just made up to make white people feel bad, and none of this is right.
And then you'll have Labour MPs telling you that white privilege does indeed exist, but if you are feeling underprivileged and you are white, that is because of the Tories. Because of course Labour would say that. They'll just deflect when there's anything to do with inequality of outcome when it is minorities on top. And if you still think white privilege exists after that, you are an idiot. Anyway, as I've said, I've reacted to this video before, but just from the start of there to have that tweeted at you after a report comes out saying that white privilege is literally the two things he just said, yeah, I'd be pretty annoyed too. Anyway, it seems that when one domino falls, quite a few others fall, because according to the Times today, universities in denial over obstacles to white working class, says Oxford Don. Now this is from Oxford, and as you know, Oxford has to be one of the most progressive unis in the United Kingdom at the moment. So, the article says, an Oxford academic says that universities and learned societies are all in denial about white working class disadvantage, with some attributing it to students' deficiencies. Peter Edwards, statutory professor of inorganic chemistry at Oxford and a member of the Royal Society, says that universities do little to attract applicants who have been on free school meals and to track their progress. Universities instead use data based on whether children went to state or private school and how many in their area have previously gone to university. Which, yeah, that second part to me doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't know why you track if you're the first person in your family to go to university, because not many people went to university before about Tony Blair's time. I mean, Tony Blair's target was to get half of Britain's children into universities, because before that it was something like 10-15%. So obviously most people are going to have parents who didn't go to university. I'm just saying it seems like a bit of a pointless metric. Anyway, so the Times article then mentions the committee report we've already been through, and then it says, Diane Abbott, the former Shadow Home Secretary, said, the government that fought tooth and nail to block free school meals now wants to claim it is the champion of white working class kids. It is simply pitting communities against each other, all of them failed by the government, as a distraction for the effects of its failures. Well, I'm not going to take anything from the party who will claim white privilege is real in all cases, despite the fact that we have a report clearly showing massive disparities with the white people at the bottom. Well, the white working class people, I should say. She accused the committee, which had a Tory majority, of pushing divisive culture war nonsense and failing to speak up for all working class children. Yes, it's always the right who are pushing culture wars. It's never the leftists who are trying to push white privilege or anything like this, is it? In a letter to the Times, Edwards says that the Select Committee report was a welcome expose of disturbing situation. He writes, my own experience in raising this problem with universities and professional bodies is that one finds snobbery, prejudice and an apparent inability to extract the sort of data that the report carefully highlights. Stereotypical attitudes towards white working class pupils are harder to counter. The belief is that there is an inherent white privilege, even in this highly disadvantaged group of young people, and as such, other groups own all the arguments of disadvantage. So that's a lot better than what the BBC said. Because this letter from the Oxford Don is clearly stating, look, there is an attitude throughout universities and elsewhere in the education system that says white privilege is there, therefore we can just neglect these white disadvantaged groups, basically. Whereas at the same time, we constantly see that they have quotas to get more of the minorities into different colleges. How are they going to do that? Well, they're going to do that by neglecting the white groups, when really I think all of these should just be blind tests. Let the truly smart people enter university, and don't just then, in the end, blanket ban everyone from one particular racial group because you've got quotas to fill. That is obviously, as I always say, incredibly immoral. Anyway, Mr. Edwards' letter then continues, any reference I make to this issue in higher education is seen as prejudice. I have even heard the shocking statement that underachievement of this class of young people arises solely from their sense of themselves. In other words, the lack of success of this group is a result of individual deficiencies. Which, to some degree, yeah, that may be true. But the thing is, as the report said, these appear to be underfunded. compared to other areas, or at least need more funding. They're not necessarily underfunded yet. I actually can't make that statement from the BBC article, but again, I don't know if they omitted anything. Edwards is from Toxteth, a deprived area of Liverpool, was on free school meals and was the first in his family to attend university. He went to Salford University and then secured a Fulbright scholarship to the US. He sits on the Royal Society of Chemistry's Inclusion and Diversity Committee. He said that it was difficult to find out how many university students who had been on free school meals. This should be far more easily available by university and by subject, he added. Which is probably true. I mean, free school meals, because that is a means-tested way of finding out, basically, if you are poor, without directly saying it. So I tend to agree with everything he's saying here. It's not that it's important to have an increase in black and ethnic minority students in chemistry. It is. Okay, so he's not great. But this is a similar issue, and it seems to be very difficult to make progress. He said we should know how many children on free school meals are applying to and entering each university, and we should do the same for subjects. Sure, more data can't harm anyone. So it does annoy me that Professor Edwards, who is sitting on a Diversity and Equality Committee, does have this ridiculous notion that it is for some reason a moral good to specifically get more ethnic minority students into a university. Because ultimately, how the hell do you do that? Well, the way you do that is neglect and reject more white people into these places. Whereas at the same time, he's kind of contradictory in this language where he's like, oh, well, we obviously need more ethnic minority students, but we also need more white working class people. Well, how are you going to do that? Oh, you're going to reject genuinely clever white people who aren't from those backgrounds, which is why I keep saying, do blind tests on these things. Just how good are these people at these subjects? And just forget about these completely arbitrary groups that at the end of the day don't make a difference. Are they going to work hard? Are they going to represent the university very well? Are they going to be a decent investment for them to go on and do further studies? Or is it going to be a good investment for them to come here and learn? That is all a university should be there for, but it's not. It is trying to implant and push forward this ridiculous ideology of ridiculous racial equality of outcomes, which is ultimately coming to this ridiculous conclusion that white working class people can't make it to university because we've got to get the rest of the minorities in first, which is just such a disgusting take. I don't know where to take it, but well, there you go. I guess in conclusion, a report is finally coming out saying white privilege needs to be taken out of the lexicon for any report made because, oh, what are the things that the right wing have been saying for years? This is going to end up being used to attack white people and excusing any sort of disparity when it comes to outcome, despite the fact that they will constantly use inequality of outcome to justify all of their stupid policies, legislation, and ideas. The left are hypocritical, who would have thunk? I'm sorry that's the only conclusion I can come up with, but, well, I mean, this stuff just annoys me and I want to talk about it. Anyway, that is everything I had for you today. So, as usual, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.